بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Peace and love to everyone in our Nostalgic Remembrance family, our followers on Twitter and Facebook and social media in general, and welcome again to another episode of the Sacred Real and Ancient Lens, where we continue to explore the spiritual dimensions and metaphysical dimensions of popular culture, film and cinema and music and all artifacts from popular culture through the lens of the Quran and Hadith and Islamic thought. And in this session, we are sort of expanding beyond the Star Wars universe. We're definitely not leaving behind the Star Wars universe. We will be revisiting the Star Wars universe specifically in terms of episodes or series like the Clone Wars and Rebels and Resistance. But for now, we just want to expand to other series and other shows and other famous epics in our contemporary culture. And I think that that's actually a really important thing to do, as we will see in this session, which is focused on the celebrated series about the zombie apocalypse, The Walking Dead. That we will be talking about The Walking Dead in this session. But I think the importance of expanding beyond the Star Wars universe and really covering a wide array, a diverse genre of film and music and video games, as we will be expanding in parallel with the retreats that we are holding, is to show how these archetypes or these motifs and themes that we are talking about actually are present in every different genre of popular culture, right? So as we will see today, and this is really one of the reasons why I personally enjoy doing this series, is because I want us to highlight these intersections between the Star Wars universe and maybe the Walking Dead universe, and then later on the Marvel universe, and then a video game here and a song there, and so on and so forth, to show how our society is really sort of experiencing these various motifs and themes, and that they are really important for our growth as a culture, as a society at this point in time. So, of course, one of The Walking Dead is a really powerful series. It's a really important series that over the past, in its 10th season right now, over the past 10 years has experienced certain ups and downs. And now it is sort of, many fans feel like the series is being stretched out and that it should probably end soon. I'm not sure how many of our viewers know that The Walking Dead is actually based on a comic book called The Walking Dead. And the world of the comic actually manifests in multiple series. So there is The Walking Dead, which tells the story of, initially in season 1, it focuses on the protagonist Rick Grimes, who wakes up in a hospital from a coma, and he finds that the world had been overtaken by a zombie apocalypse. And then it progresses, and around season 9, mid-season 9, Rick Grimes leaves the show, and everybody is hoping that he comes back to the show. And then it goes through these very mythological motifs of confrontation between the hero and the villain, between the protagonist and the antagonist, hoping to reach of course, the major villainry that is happening in The Walking Dead is the world that has fallen apart into the hands of zombies, and it's as if people or human beings have, those of them that have died and come back, not fully come back as human, but actually come back as the Walking Dead. Altogether, they have transformed the world as back to its basic primal instincts of survival. And the show, The Walking Dead, sort of departs here and there from the comic books. And then there you have the Fear of the Walking Dead, which begins a little bit earlier. It follows the lives of a different family in a different part of the United States on the West Coast in California. And that's a family who witnessed the outbreak of the virus that would eventually cause the apocalypse. And then I hear that they're just going to start a new show based on the comic book series. I want to focus so my focus here is really on The Walking Dead, on the show, the main show, The Walking Dead, which is now in its 10th season. And I want to focus specifically on a few or three different main motifs. The first one is the idea of passing forms, right? That, we should ask ourselves, first of all, The Walking Dead is one of many shows surrounding the zombie apocalypse, of the motif focusing on the subject of the zombie apocalypse, which our society today has really become obsessed with, right? So you have The Walking Dead, you have, in terms of just TV shows, you have The Walking Dead, you have Z Nation, and then in terms of film, you have World War Z, you have films that go back many, many years in the past. In the early 2000s or in the 90s, you had 24 Hours Later. And then before that, you have the Night of the Living Dead, and so on and so forth. And there seems to be an obsession that our society has with the apocalypse in general, and with the zombie apocalypse specifically. Of course, we know there are many films that, like 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow, and movies like that focus on the end of the world and a rebirth, right? That the world gets reborn again, starting over, the idea of starting over. And we should ask ourselves, why are we fascinated as a society with this idea of starting over, of the world falling completely into chaos and then starting over once again, afresh, right? So in the Quran, this idea of the world falling apart is, of course, it's a recurrent idea in the Quran, and it's a recurrent idea in all scriptures. We know that, for example, in the Bible, the book of Revelations is all about the apocalypse. In the Quran, there are many, many chapters like Surah Takwir, when the sun loses its light. That's all about the signs of the Day of Judgment. But there is a verse also, there are a couple of verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, says, إِنَّمَا مَثَلُ هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا كَمَاءٍ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ فَاخْتَلَطَ بِهِ نَبَاتُ الْأَرْضِ فَأَصْبَحَ هَشِيمًا تَذْرُوهُ الرِّيَاحُ وَكَانَ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مُقْتَدِرًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God Almighty, says that the example of this life is like water which we brought down from heaven, and it mixes with the soil of the earth, and out comes green plants. And then these green plants wither away and become like dust, and then it's blown away with the wind. Meaning that all this world is about, it's about passing forms that pass away. When we contemplate over the seasons, specifically what this verse is talking about is really the season of autumn, right? That you have these leaves that bloom in the spring, and they become green, and sometimes multiple colors of roses. And then when the fall comes, the leaves don't disappear, right? The leaves actually change color and they wither away. They become essentially like zombie leaves. And I think that this is really one of the powers lingering in the symbolic power lingering in the idea of a zombie. That it displays outwardly and externally the idea of death, right? And one of the amazing things about the show The Walking Dead is, in my recollection, they never use the word zombie in the show, or maybe very rarely. Rather, from the beginning, from episode 1, season 1, the term that's used to describe The Walking Dead is walkers, right? And I think this is a really symbolic terminology, because when you're saying what you said, I think what the writers of the show are saying is that the basic human action of walking does not necessarily signify life. That life is much deeper than that. It's not something that we experience outwardly. It's something that is inside of us. It is something that is inward to us, right? And I think that, this idea of witnessing human beings who are still exhibiting certain human behaviors, but essentially they're behaving like animals. The only thing they know, actually not even entirely like animals, the only thing they know is to feed. They don't even have the notion or the desire to reproduce like animals. The only survival instinct they have is to nourish, is to feed nonstop. And so they look like dead leaves. And whereas in the Quran, God is instructing human beings, the Quran is instructing human beings to reflect over dead leaves, to understand death. Shows like The Walking Dead actually manifest, they play on that idea, the scriptural idea, that motif, by doing what? By displaying human beings as dead leaves as well. So essentially, this is what happens to you when you die. And if you wish to live forever on the earth, then this might be your final, this might be the life that you live as someone or as a creature whose only interest is to nourish the body. So that's really one of the main, important aspects in the theme of the passing forms. The other idea, which is something that we have talked about before, is the power of these mythologies, like The Walking Dead, like Star Wars, like Marvel, is that witnessing the apocalypse outside of us helps us to negotiate and to undergo the apocalypse within, right? And in the case we talked about that in our present day and age, our society has become almost obsessed with the idea of the apocalypse. It's because we are seeing our world, our entire world, sort of unwind and unfold. It's undoing itself, right? We are seeing these wars and the hatred and the violence slowly filling the world everywhere, that we feel as though if we are able to witness a story where the world actually does experience the apocalypse and yet human beings are able to survive it, then that gives us hope. Then that gives us hope, and we might be able to survive our what seems like an impending doom, impending apocalypse, but even more deeply, the demons we face within us, we are able to work them out in a story. We like to witness them in a story that is happening outside of us in something like The Walking Dead. And this is also a thoroughly scriptural, traditional, ancient motif where, for example, in the Quran, we have the verse, سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. That God says, we will show them our signs, meaning us human beings, we will show them our signs in the horizons, in the world, and within their own selves, which means you need to see signs in those two dimensions, in the world and within your own self. And then we need to do the process of translating and connecting those two sets of signs, what we are seeing outside of us and what we are seeing inside of us, so that it becomes clear to us that this whole affair of the Quran, of search for meaning, is al-haq. It's the truth, that God is the truth, that God is the real, that the Prophet ﷺ is the seal of messengers, and so on and so forth. I think a second major theme that we also experience in The Walking Dead is this really powerful idea of pushing the human being to the limit when they're burdened or made to face trials which they cannot handle. And there is a really powerful scene in The Walking Dead when the main character Rick Grimes and his son Carl and some of the other survivors are faced by a gang, which of course has become sort of the rulers in this law, in this no man's land. The outlaws are the ones who govern the world. and they capture them, and they're about to hurt them. They're about to actually assault Carl, Rick's son. And then there is a moment where Rick, in complete desperation, trying to save his son, he proceeds like a zombie by biting the flesh of his captor. And that's the only way that he's able to escape his captors and save his son. And I think this is a really powerful sort of, I mean, that scene encapsulates and really reveals the intention of the writers of the show to ask the audience a question. What separates, in a situation like the zombie apocalypse, what would separate human beings from zombies? If zombies are killing and eating human flesh without choice, they are essentially unable, they don't have a choice anymore. They have no will. They are the walking dead. And yet human beings who have the will, who are still in their complete faculties, are actually behaving like zombies. Excuse me, in that circumstance, what separates human beings from zombies? Right? And so we see that even a protagonist like Rick Grimes can be pushed to the limit where he behaves like the villain. And then we see in a character like Negan, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, a brilliant actor and a brilliant role. We see Negan begin around season 7 and season 6 and 7 as being probably the most difficult, indomitable villain that Rick and the survivors have to deal with. And then by season 8 and 9, we see Negan completely transforms and is redeemed as, and especially now in season 10, is redeemed as someone who is transformed, as someone who is trying to redeem himself and help the very people that he tried to kill in season 6 and 7. So it's this idea of difficult situations bring out the best in us. And of course, we talked about this in the Star Wars series, that this idea of fitna, of tests, of tribulations, burning the dirt off of the gold that is our hearts and our who we really are, and that these tests and tribulations bring out our true personalities and our true character. And then we have someone like Carol, who we meets in season 1 as someone who was very vulnerable. She was domestically abused by her husband, and then after her husband dies and after her daughter dies, she transforms throughout the series to be one of the most courageous and one of the most brave and one of the central characters in the show. And it's also this idea, she struggles with who she has become. Her ability to kill at will in order to survive and to protect the people she loves also causes her distress. And she undergoes deep challenges in trying to deal with who she became and what she wants to become in the future. And I think as we see in season 10, one of the central ideas that emerges in season 10 is this new villain, Alpha, whose entire objective is that, look, in this new world where nature sort of took control from human beings, the only way to survive is to become like animals, is to use survival instincts, is to meld with the zombies, with the walkers, to walk amongst them like one of them. And then on the other side, you have our survivors completely convinced, and this was Rick's mission, this was Rick's vision before he disappeared, that no, we don't have to resort to survival of the fittest. We can actually resurrect civilization. We can actually rebuild our civilization. Just like the early human beings, thousands and thousands and millions of years ago, human beings were able to domesticate nature to their will, that amidst the zombie apocalypse, we should also be able to subject nature into our will, even with the existence of the walkers or the zombies. So there's a lot of powerful motifs that are functioning within The Walking Dead. It's one of the most, it's one of the richest, most, and it is one of the most graphic shows on television today. But I think the silver lining amidst all that gore and that suffering is that there are these deep human transformations that the characters go through, so that by the end they are they emerge transformed by a world that it is itself transformed, right? That the world is no longer the same, so the characters can no longer stay the same. And one of the beautiful things about the show also is that each of these characters has a past, and that past plays a role in their transformation. And this is, of course, also has to do with losing loved ones. As we know from the show, people like Rick Grimes, he loses his wife, and then eventually he loses his son, and then he eventually wants to lose himself as well, to return back to his family. And so this idea of loss and triumph are canonical ancient motifs in mythology, that is how the hero is born. He's born from suffering and redemption. I hope that these few motifs, of course, amidst 10 seasons of The Walking Dead, is difficult to sort of do justice to the show in 20 minutes, but I hope that these brief remarks sort of capture the spirit of The Walking Dead and its importance. Please continue to follow us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram, and stay tuned for the next episode of The Sacred Real and Ancient Lens. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Peace and love.